entirely believable. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Not until a pair of court officers finally pried Gary away and led him out of the courtroom. If he was acting, there hadn't been a single false move. He was completely absorbed with his wife and little girl. He never once looked around the courtroom to see if he had an audience. He played it perfectly. Or was Gary Murphy an innocent man who had just been convicted of kidnapping and murder? Chapter 67. Pressure, pressure. Jessie sang along with the tune playing loudly inside her head. The skin was tight against her forehead as Jessie maneuvered down the winding mountain road without caution or fear. She leaned into every curve, keeping the powerful bike in fourth gear. The fir trees, jutting boulders, and ancient telephone wires were a blur as she sped along. Everything was fuzzy. She felt as if she'd been in freefall for over a year, maybe for her whole life. She was going to explode soon. Nobody understood what it was like to be under so much pressure for so long. Even when she was a kid, she had always been afraid of making a single mistake, afraid that if she wasn't perfect little Jessie, she would never be loved by her mother and father. Perfect little Jessie. Good is not good enough, and good is the enemy of great, her father used to tell her almost every day. And so she was a calculating straight-A student. She was Miss Popular. She was on every fast track she could find. Billy Joel had recorded a song a few years back, Pressure. That was an approximation for the way she felt every day of her life. She had to make it stop somehow. And now maybe she had a way. Jessie downshifted into third as she approached the lake cottage. All the lights were on. Otherwise, everything around the lake seemed at peace. The water was a sleek black table that seemed to merge with the mountains. But the lights were on. She hadn't left them on. Jessie got off the bike and quickly went inside. The front door was unlocked. No one was in the living room. "Hello?" she called out. Jessie checked the kitchen, then both bedrooms. No one there. There was no sign that anyone had been in either room, except for the lights. "Hey! Who's here?" The kitchen screen door was unlatched. She walked outside and down toward the dock. Nothing. Nobody. The sudden burr of a wing beat sounded off to the left. Blurred wings flapped just over the surface of the water. Jessie stood at the edge of the dock and let out a long sigh. The Billy Joel song still played in her head. Self-mocking and taunting. Pressure, pressure. She could feel it in every inch of her body. Someone grabbed her. Extremely strong arms, like a vice, were around Jessie. She held back a scream. Then something was being put into her mouth. Jessie inhaled. She recognized Colombian gold. Very good dope. She inhaled a second time. Relaxed a little in the strong arms that held her. "I've missed you," she heard a voice say. Billy Joel screamed inside her head. "What are you doing here?" she finally asked. Part 5. The Second Investigation. Chapter 68. Maggie Rose Dunn was in darkness again. She could see shapes all around her. She knew what they were and where she was, even why she was there. She was thinking about escaping again, but the warning jumped into her head. Always the warning. If you try to escape, you won't be killed, Maggie. That would be too easy. You'll be put under the ground again. You'll go back into your little grave. So don't ever try to escape, Maggie Rose. Don't even think about it. She was starting to forget so much now. Sometimes she couldn't even remember who she was. It all seemed like a bad dream, like lots of nightmares, one after the other. Maggie Rose wondered if her mother and father were still looking for her. Why would they be? It was so long ago that she'd been kidnapped. Maggie understood that. Mr. Senigi had taken her from the day school, but then she never saw him again. There was only the warning. Sometimes she felt as if she were only a story character she'd made up. Tears filled her eyes. It wasn't so dark now. Morning was coming. She wouldn't try to escape again. She hated this, but she never wanted to go under the ground again. Maggie Rose knew what all the shapes were. They were children, all in just one room of the house, from which there was no escape. Chapter 69. Jessie came back to Washington the week after the trial ended. It seemed like a good time for beginnings. I was ready. God Almighty, was I ready to move on with life. We talked over the phone some, but not too much, about her state of mind. Jessie did tell me one thing. She said it was really bizarre that she had invested so much in her career, and now she didn't care about it at all. I had missed Jessie even more than I thought I could. My mind was on her while I investigated the murder of two 13-year-olds over a pair of pump sneakers. Sampson and I caught the killer, a 15-year-old from Black Hole. That same week, I was offered a job in Washington as VICAP coordinator between the D.C. Police Department and the FBI. It was a bigger, higher-paying job than the one I had, but I turned it down flat. It was my buyout from Carl Monroe. No thanks. I couldn't sleep at night. The storm that had begun inside my head the very first day of the kidnapping was still there. I couldn't get Maggie Rose Dunn completely out of my head. I couldn't give up on the case. I wouldn't let myself. I watched anything and everything on ESPN, sometimes at 3 and 4 in the morning. I played Alex the Shrink in the old prefab trailer over at St. A's. Sampson and I drank a few cases of beer together. Then we tried to work it off at the gym. In between, we spent long hours at work. I drove to Jessie's apartment the day she came back. On the way over there, I listened to Derek McGinty on WAMU again, my talk show brother. His voice calmed my nervous stomach. One time I'd actually called into his night show, disguised my voice, talked about Maria, the kids, being on the edge for too long. When Jessie opened the door, I was startled by the way she looked. She'd let her hair grow and fan out so that it looked like a sunburst. She was tan and looked as healthy as a California lifeguard in August. She looked as if nothing could ever be wrong in her life. "You look rested and all," I told her. I was feeling a little resentful, actually. She had taken off before the trial had ended. No goodbyes, no explanations. What did that tell me about who she was? Jessie had always been trim, but she was leaner and tighter now. The circles that had been under her eyes so many times during the kidnapping investigation were gone. She had on denim shorts and an old T-shirt that said, "If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit." She was dazzling in all ways. She smiled gently. "I'm a lot better, Alex. I think I'm almost healed." She came out on the porch and into my arms, and I felt a little healed myself. I held her and thought that I had been on this strange planet, all alone for a while. I could see myself on this barren moonscape. It had been up to me to find someone new to be with, someone to love again. "Tell me everything that's been happening. What's it like to fall off the earth?" I asked. Her hair smelled so fresh and clean. Everything about her seemed new and refreshed. "It's pretty good, actually, falling off the earth. I haven't not worked since I was 16 years old. It was scary the first few days. Then it was fine," she said with her head still buried in my chest. "There was only one thing I missed," she whispered. "I wanted you there with me. If that sounds corny, too bad. That was one of the things I wanted to hear." "I would have come," I said. "I needed to do it the way I did. I had to think everything through one time. I didn't call anybody else, Alex. Not one other person. I found out a lot about myself. Maybe I even found out who Jesse Flanagan really is." I raised her chin up and looked into her eyes. "Tell me what you found out. Tell me who Jesse is." Arm in arm, we went inside the house. But Jesse didn't talk very much about who she was or what she found out about herself down at her lake cottage. We fell into old habits, and ones that, I must admit, I had missed. I wondered if she still cared for me, and just how much she'd wanted to come back to D.C. I needed a sign from her. Jesse began to unbutton my shirt, and there was no way I was going to stop her. "I did miss you so much," she whispered against my chest. "Did you miss me, Alex?" I had to smile. My physical condition at that moment was the obvious answer to her question. Now what do you think? Take a guess. Jesse and I got a little wild that afternoon. I couldn't help remembering the night the National Star showed up outside our motel room. She was definitely leaner and tighter, and she'd been in playing shape before she'd gone away. Jesse was also tan all over. "Who's darker?" I asked her and grinned. "I definitely am. Brown as a berry, as they say around the lake." "You're just dazzling me with your brilliance," I told her. "Uh-huh. How long can we keep this up? Talking and looking, not touching. Will you unbutton the rest of your shirt buttons, please?" "Does that excite you?" I asked. My voice caught in my throat a little. "Uh-huh. Actually, you can take the shirt off." "You were going to tell me something about who you are and what you learned on your retreat," I reminded her. Confessor and lover. A sexy concept in itself. "You can kiss me now if you want to, Alex. Can you kiss me without anything but our lips touching?" I'm not sure about that. Let me turn a little this way and that way. Are you trying to shut me up, by the way?" "Why would I want to do that, Dr. Detective?" Chapter 70. I threw myself into work again. I had promised myself that I'd solve the kidnapping case somehow. The Black Night would not be vanquished. One miserable, cold, rainy night, I trudged out by myself to see Nina Sarizia again. The Sarizia girl was still the only person who'd actually seen Gary Sinigi's accomplice. I was in the neighborhood anyway. Right. Why was I in the Langley Terrace projects at night in a cold, drizzling rain? Because I had become a nutcase who couldn't get enough information about an 18-month-old kidnapping. Because I was a perfectionist who had been that way for at least 30 years of my life. Because I needed to know what had really happened to Maggie Rose Dunn. Because I couldn't escape the gaze of Gustav Sanders. because I wanted the truth about Seniji Murphy.